This is the Golden Pharaoh mystery, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Welcome back to the Little Grey Cells. I'm Arthur Hastings, and thank you for joining me tonight on this journey. If you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to subscribe and leave a comment where you're listening from. Tonight, we travel to the crossroads of civilizations, where ancient trade routes carried not only silk and spices, but also secrets and death. Dim your lights, Poirot yourself a tisane, and prepare to exercise your own grey cells. The British Museum had never seen crowds quite like this in all its distinguished history. From the moment the imposing doors opened on that crisp October morning, thousands of visitors poured through the grand entrance, filling the marble halls with excited conversation and shuffling feet, all drawn by the same irresistible attraction: the Golden Pharaoh Exhibition, featuring artifacts from the recently discovered tomb of Amenhotep the Magnificent, including the legendary golden death mask that had already claimed, according to the sensational press accounts that had dominated the newspapers for weeks, 3 victims through its ancient and terrible curse. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the throng, his immaculate appearance a stark contrast to the jostling masses around him. His patent leather shoes gleaming, his suit pressed to perfection, his magnificent moustache waxed to precise points. He had received a personal invitation to the private viewing the previous evening, extended by Sir Malcolm Hartington, the museum's distinguished director, who had expressed concerns about the security of the exhibition and the strange, troubling events that had surrounded the artifacts since their arrival on English soil. "The curse is nonsense, of course," Sir Malcolm had said over dinner at his exclusive club, where portraits of former directors gazed down upon their conversation with dignified disapproval. "I am a man of science, Monsieur Poirot, not superstition. I do not believe that ancient words carved in stone can reach across 30 centuries to strike down the living. But the deaths cannot be ignored, and the insurance company is becoming increasingly nervous about our liability exposure. They have insisted on additional security measures, and I thought that having the famous Hercule Poirot examine our arrangements might reassure them that everything possible is being done to ensure the safety of our visitors and our priceless artifacts." "You speak of deaths, Sir Malcolm. Plural. How many, exactly? And under what circumstances did these unfortunate individuals meet their ends?"
3. Since the tomb was opened 18 months ago in the Valley of the Kings. The first was Dr. Edward Blackwood, the archaeologist who led the expedition. A brilliant man, tireless in his pursuit of knowledge. He died of a sudden and mysterious fever 3 weeks after the discovery. The doctors said it was some kind of infection, perhaps contracted in the tomb itself from ancient spores or bacteria. The second was his assistant, young Thomas Hartwell, who fell from a scaffold while supervising the removal of artifacts from the burial chamber. And the third, Sir Malcolm's weathered face had grown troubled, shadows passing behind his eyes. The third was Lord Ashworth, who financed the entire expedition out of his personal fortune. He was found dead in his study just last month, with the golden mask sitting on his desk, where he had been examining it. The official verdict was heart failure, but there were those who claimed to see terror on his face, as though he had seen something in those final moments that frightened him, literally, to death. "And you do not believe the curse is genuinely responsible for these tragic deaths?" "I believe that 3 deaths in 18 months, all connected to the same archaeological discovery, require thorough and rational investigation.
Whether the cause is supernatural, which I very much doubt, or merely criminal, which seems far more likely to my scientific mind, I want answers. I want to understand what is happening and how to prevent further tragedy. That is why I have asked for your help, Monsieur Poirot. Your reputation for solving the most baffling mysteries precedes you, and I believe that if anyone can unravel this tangled web of death and superstition, it is you. Poirot had agreed to examine the exhibition and its security arrangements, though his formidable grey cells were already working on a different puzzle entirely. The puzzle of how 3 men could die in apparently unconnected circumstances, separated by months and continents, yet all be irrefutably linked to the same ancient artifact and its legendary curse. Coincidence could explain 1 death, perhaps even 2, but 3 deaths forming such a clear pattern suggested something far more sinister than mere misfortune. Suggested, in fact, deliberate design. The private viewing had given him the opportunity to study the treasures without the distraction of crowds pressing in from every direction. The collection was extraordinary. Jewelry of exquisite craftsmanship, furniture inlaid with precious stones, weapons that had once belonged to warriors dead for millennia, and ceremonial objects that had lain undisturbed in their tomb for 3,000 years, preserved by the dry Egyptian climate in a state of remarkable and almost miraculous perfection. But the centerpiece of the exhibition, the object that drew every eye and commanded every conversation among scholars and visitors alike, was the golden death mask of Amenhotep the Magnificent. It was, Poirot had to admit, with the aesthetic appreciation he applied to all beautiful things, a breathtaking work of ancient artistry. Nearly 2 feet tall, crafted from solid gold that gleamed with a warm radiance under the museum's carefully positioned lights, the mask depicted the pharaoh's face with an idealized serenity that transcended the ages and spoke of divine kingship. The eyes were inlaid with lapis lazuli and obsidian, giving them an unsettling appearance of life, as though the long-dead ruler were still watching, still judging those who dared to gaze upon his eternal countenance. The headdress was adorned with the sacred cobra, the uraeus that symbolized royal power and divine protection, and the chin bore the ceremonial beard that marked the wearer as both king and god incarnate. But it was the inscription carved on the base of the mask that had captured the public imagination and fueled the rumors of an ancient curse that could reach across the millennia to strike down the living. Translated by the expedition's philologist, a distinguished scholar of ancient languages, the hieroglyphic text read, "He who disturbs the rest of Amenhotep shall know the wrath of the gods and their terrible vengeance. His days shall be numbered like the grains of sand in an hourglass. His nights shall be filled with terror and dark visions, and his soul shall wander forever in the darkness beyond death, denied the light of the sun and the peace of the blessed." A dramatic warning indeed, Poirot had observed to Sir Malcolm as they stood before the case during the private viewing. Designed to strike terror into the hearts of those who might contemplate violating the sanctity of the royal tomb.
Standard tomb decoration, nothing more than that. The ancient Egyptians were quite fond of such dramatic pronouncements. They believed these curses would deter grave robbers and protect their king's treasures for eternity. Obviously, their confidence was somewhat misplaced, as 3,000 years of tomb robbery clearly demonstrates. Obviously not entirely successful, as the empty tombs throughout Egypt's valleys demonstrate. And yet, 3 men connected to this particular discovery
are dead, struck down in circumstances that seem to fulfill the curse's terrible promise. Now, watching the crowds surge toward the exhibition hall with an enthusiasm that bordered on morbid fascination, Poirot found himself contemplating the intersection of ancient superstition and modern crime. The curse might be nonsense, as Sir Malcolm so firmly insisted, but the deaths were undeniably real. Real people, with real lives cut short, real families left grieving, real questions demanding answers. And where there were deaths under suspicious circumstances, there were usually motives. Human motives rooted in greed, jealousy, revenge, or ambition. Motives that had nothing whatsoever to do with the wrath of long-dead gods. He was interrupted in his contemplation by a sudden commotion near the entrance to the exhibition hall, raised voices cutting through the general murmur of the crowd, a woman's piercing scream that silenced all other conversation, and then the unmistakable sound of a body falling heavily to the marble floor, that distinctive thud that Poirot had heard too many times in his career and which never failed to quicken his pulse. Poirot moved through the crowd with surprising agility for a man of his build and sedentary habits, his detective's instincts immediately and fully engaged by this sudden development. By the time he reached the scene of the disturbance, a circle of shocked onlookers had formed around a man lying motionless on the cold marble, his face contorted in an expression of absolute and unmistakable terror that seemed to confirm the worst fears of the superstitious observers. "Stand back, please, if you would be so kind. I am Hercule Poirot, and I have some experience with such matters." He knelt beside the body with professional calm, checking for a pulse that he already knew with grim certainty he would not find. The man was dead. Had been dead, Poirot estimated, from the temperature of the skin and the fixed dilation of the pupils, for only moments at most. His eyes were wide open, fixed on something that no living person could perceive, staring into a darkness that lay beyond the world of the living. And his right hand was extended toward the exhibition hall, reaching for something, or perhaps pointing at something within, as though identifying his killer with his final gesture. "Does anyone here know this unfortunate man?" Poirot asked the assembled crowd, raising his voice to carry over the frightened whispers and shocked exclamations. "Can anyone identify him?" A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her face pale with shock, and her hands trembling visibly.
That's Robert Blackwood, Monsieur Poirot. I recognize him from the newspapers. He's Dr. Edward Blackwood's son, the archaeologist who discovered the tomb and died of the curse. Robert came here today to see his father's greatest work, to see the artifacts that his father gave his life to discover and bring to England. He told me just minutes ago that he had to face his fears, had to confront the curse that had haunted his family.
Robert Blackwood, the son of the first curse victim, dead at the very threshold of the exhibition that displayed his father's greatest discovery, struck down with the same expression of terror that had marked all the previous deaths. The curse, it seemed, had claimed a fourth victim, or so the whispers that spread rapidly through the crowd declared. But Hercule Poirot, kneeling beside the body with his formidable grey cells fully engaged, was already considering other possibilities. 4 deaths in 18 months, all connected to the same expedition, all marked by expressions of terror that seemed to confirm the supernatural legend. But Poirot did not believe in curses or ancient magic. He believed in human wickedness, in greed and ambition, and the terrible things that ordinary people would do when they believed they could escape the consequences of their actions. And somewhere in this tangled web of death and superstition, he was certain, lay a very human murderer, waiting to be discovered and brought to justice. Chapter 2: The Blackwood Legacy. The British Museum was closed immediately following the shocking discovery of Robert Blackwood's body, and Hercule Poirot found himself at the centre of a hastily convened conference in Sir Malcolm's private office on the museum's administrative floor. Present were the museum director himself, looking pale and shaken by the events that had unfolded in his institution, Inspector Charles Morrison of Scotland Yard, a practical man with sceptical eyes and a no-nonsense manner, Dr. Helena Crane, the exhibition's chief curator and a woman of formidable academic reputation, and a nervous young man introduced as James Whitfield, the museum's head of security, who seemed to be questioning every decision he had ever made in his professional career. Heart failure, pure and simple, Inspector Morrison declared after completing his initial examination of the body with the assistance of the museum's consulting physician. Same as Lord Ashworth. The man simply dropped dead where he stood, his heart giving out without any warning. No wounds anywhere on the body, no signs of violence or struggle, no indication of foul play of any kind that I can detect. And yet he died with an expression of absolute terror frozen on his face, Poirot observed thoughtfully, reaching toward the exhibition hall as though pointing at something within. Does that not strike you as significant, Inspector, as requiring some explanation beyond mere cardiac arrest? It strikes me as the natural reaction of a man experiencing a sudden and fatal cardiac event, Morrison replied, with the confident skepticism of a police officer who had seen too many strange deaths to be easily impressed. The body does peculiar and sometimes disturbing things in its final moments. Muscle spasms, involuntary movements, facial contortions that can be misinterpreted by frightened observers. There's nothing supernatural about it, I assure you. Perhaps not supernatural, no, but I find it curious, more than curious. I find it deeply significant that 4 men connected to the same archaeological discovery have now died in circumstances that, while apparently natural in origin, share certain distinctive and troubling features. The terror on the face, the absence of any warning symptoms, the proximity, in 2 cases, to the golden mask itself. You're not suggesting the curse is real? Morrison's tone was skeptical. I am suggesting that someone may wish us to believe the curse is real, while pursuing an entirely human agenda. The superstition provides convenient cover for murder, if these are indeed murders. Sir Malcolm leaned forward. Can you prove they are murders, Monsieur Poirot? Not yet, but I should like to investigate further, with your permission. I should like to speak with everyone who had access to the artifacts, everyone who knew the deceased, everyone who might have reason to wish them harm. That could be a very long list, Dr. Crane observed. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of academic authority. The expedition involved dozens of people, and the artifacts have been handled by countless museum staff since their arrival. Then I had better begin immediately. Poirot turned to the young security chief. Mr. Whitfield, I should like to examine the exhibition hall itself, particularly the area around the golden mask. Is that possible? Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I'll take you there myself. The exhibition hall, empty now of visitors, had an eerie quality that was quite different from the bustling atmosphere of the morning. The artifacts seemed to watch from their cases, silent witnesses to whatever secrets this room might hold. The golden mask occupied a place of honor at the center of the hall, displayed on a pedestal beneath specially designed lighting that made the gold gleam with an almost supernatural radiance. Poirot approached it slowly, studying not the mask itself, but the arrangement of the space around it. The security measures for this piece. Describe them to me. State of the art, Whitfield said proudly. The case is made of reinforced glass, resistant to impact. There are pressure sensors in the pedestal that will trigger alarms if the case is lifted or tampered with, and the mask itself is anchored to a base that cannot be removed without special tools. And at night, when the museum is closed? Guards patrol every hour, and the hall is locked with multiple keys. Only Sir Malcolm, Dr. Crane, and myself have complete access. What about during the exhibition itself? Could someone approach the case closely enough to interfere with it somehow? Interfere how? That is what I am trying to determine. Poirot circled the pedestal, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The mask has been in this case since the exhibition opened? Yes, 3 days ago. And in that time, has anyone reported anything unusual? Strange smells, perhaps, or sounds? Whitfield frowned. One of the guards mentioned something yesterday, said he thought he smelled something odd near the mask. Like almonds, he said. But we checked the ventilation system and found nothing wrong. Almonds. Poirot's grey cells sparked with sudden interest. The smell of almonds was associated with certain poisons, cyanide most notably, though it could also indicate other substances. This guard, I should like to speak with him. I'll arrange it. And I should like a complete list of everyone who has had access to this hall since the artifacts arrived. Staff, contractors, special visitors, everyone. That's a considerable undertaking, Monsieur Poirot. Murder is a considerable crime, Mr. Whitfield. If murder it is. Chapter 3. The Expedition's Survivors. The investigation that followed took Poirot deep into the world of Egyptology, a realm of academic rivalries, financial pressures, and passions that burned as hot as the desert sun. He began by interviewing those who had survived the expedition that discovered Amenhotep's tomb, seeking to understand the relationships and tensions that might have led to murder. Dr. Helena Crane had been the expedition's second-in-command, responsible for cataloguing and preserving the artifacts as they were removed from the tomb. She received Poirot in her office at the museum, a cramped space overflowing with books, papers, and small antiquities. Edward Blackwood was a brilliant archaeologist, she said. But he was also a difficult man. Obsessive, demanding, impossible to work with at times. He drove his staff relentlessly, himself most of all. When he died, many of us felt relieved, I'm ashamed to say. The pressure was finally lifted. Did you have conflicts with Dr. Blackwood? Constantly. We disagreed about methodology, about interpretation, about how the artifacts should be handled and displayed. He was old school, believed in getting results at any cost. I was trained in more careful methods, concerned with preservation as much as discovery. And these disagreements, did they ever become personal? Dr. Crane hesitated. There was an incident toward the end of the expedition. Edward accused me of trying to steal credit for the discovery, said I was plotting to publish my own account before the official report was completed. It wasn't true, but he was convinced I was betraying him. We barely spoke for the last weeks of the dig. And after his death, who took charge of the expedition?
I did, by default. There was no one else with the qualifications. The artifacts were my responsibility from that point forward. A responsibility that has brought you considerable professional recognition, I imagine. Dr. Crane's eyes narrowed. If you're suggesting I had something to gain from Edward's death, you're not wrong.
But I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't kill any of them. The fever that took Edward was real. Half the workers on the dig came down with something similar. Thomas Hartwell's fall was witnessed by a dozen people, and I was in Egypt when Lord Ashworth died. What about Robert Blackwood? Where were you this morning? In my office, preparing for the public opening. You can check with my assistant. She was with me from 8 o'clock until we heard the commotion. Poirot made a note to verify this alibi, then moved on to his next interview. Lord Ashworth's widow, Lady Catherine, received him at the family's townhouse in Mayfair. She was a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed in mourning, with the composed manner of someone who had learned to hide her emotions behind a mask of social propriety.
My husband was obsessed with Egypt, she said. He had been since childhood. Something about the mystery of it, the grandeur. When he heard that Dr. Blackwood was planning an expedition to search for Amenhotep's tomb, he insisted on financing it. Cost us nearly everything we had.
The expedition was that expensive?
You have no idea. The permits, the equipment, the workers, the bribes to local officials. It went on for years, draining our accounts month after month. I begged him to stop, to admit that the tomb might never be found, but he refused. He said he would find it or die trying.
And he did find it?
Yes, the greatest archaeological discovery of the century, they called it. But by then, we were nearly bankrupt. The artifacts were supposed to save us. The exhibition fees, the book deals, the lecture tours. Instead,
they killed him. You believe in the curse? Lady Ashworth's composure cracked slightly. I believe my husband saw something that night. Something that stopped his heart. Whether it was supernatural or not, I cannot say. But he was terrified, Monsieur Poirot. I found him, you know, sitting at his desk with that horrible mask in front of him, his face twisted in fear. Whatever killed him, it was not natural. The mask was on his desk. How did it come to be there? He had borrowed it from the museum. For a private viewing, he said. He wanted to examine it one more time before the exhibition opened. Sir Malcolm arranged it as a favour. And you saw no one else that night? Heard nothing unusual? Nothing. I had retired early. My husband often worked late in his study. When I came down in the morning, he was already gone. Poirot's next interview was with a man he had not expected to encounter. Robert Blackwood's brother, William, who had arrived at the museum shortly after his sibling's death, and was now sitting in Sir Malcolm's office, his face a mask of grief and barely contained anger. First my father, now my brother, William Blackwood said, his voice tight. The curse has taken everyone I loved, and you people just keep displaying those damned artifacts as though nothing has happened. You believe the curse is responsible for their deaths. What else could it be? 4 men dead, all connected to the tomb. The inscription warned what would happen to those who disturbed the pharaoh's rest. My father ignored the warning, and now his entire family is paying the price. Your brother, Robert, did he have any connection to the expedition beyond his father's involvement? He was there, at the dig, I mean. He spent a summer helping with the excavation before the tomb was actually found. He wanted to follow in Father's footsteps, become an archaeologist himself. But after Father died, he abandoned those plans. He became obsessed with proving the curse was real.
He researched every death connected to Egyptian tombs, every unexplained illness, every accident. He was convinced that there was something genuinely supernatural about these artifacts, something that science couldn't explain. "And what do you believe, Mr. Blackwood?" William was silent for a long moment. "I believe my brother died of fear."
I believe he worked himself into such a state of terror that his heart simply gave out. Whether the curse caused that fear, or whether it was his own imagination, does it matter? The result is the same.
It matters, Poirot said quietly. If someone is using the legend of the curse to commit murder, it matters very much indeed.
Chapter 4. The Poison Theory. The medical examiner's report on Robert Blackwood arrived the following morning, and its contents gave Poirot's grey cells much to contemplate. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, consistent with the deaths of Lord Ashworth and, retrospectively, Dr. Edward Blackwood. But there was an anomaly, a faint trace of an unknown substance in the victim's bloodstream, too small to identify definitively, but sufficient to raise questions. "It could be nothing," Inspector Morrison said when Poirot shared the finding. "Could be something he ate for breakfast, or a medication he was taking."
Or it could be poison,
Poirot countered.
A poison designed to induce cardiac arrest, administered in a way that leaves minimal trace evidence.
And how would such a poison be administered? Blackwood collapsed in public, surrounded by dozens of witnesses. No one touched him. No one came near him. He simply dropped dead.
That is the puzzle, is it not? How does one poison a man without touching him, without approaching him, without leaving any visible evidence of the crime?
Poirot returned to the exhibition hall, determined to examine every aspect of the space where Robert Blackwood had died. The spot where the body had fallen was unremarkable. Ordinary marble flooring, nothing that could have concealed a weapon or delivery mechanism. The air seemed clean, the ventilation normal. But there was the matter of the almonds. He sought out the guard who had reported the strange smell, a man named Peters, who had worked at the museum for 15 years. Peters was initially reluctant to discuss the matter, fearing that his report would be dismissed as foolishness. But Poirot's gentle persistence eventually drew out the full story.
It was yesterday afternoon, sir, during the private viewing. I was making my rounds, and when I passed near the Golden Mask, I caught a whiff of something. Sweet, like almonds or marzipan. I thought maybe someone had smuggled in food, which isn't allowed. But when I looked around, there was no one nearby.
The smell was coming from the case itself.
From inside the case?
That's what it seemed like, sir. But when I reported it to Mr. Whitfield, he said I must have imagined it. The case is sealed. Nothing can get in or out. And today? Have you noticed the smell again? I haven't been near the mask today, sir. Not since Mr. Blackwood died. Poirot thanked the guard and returned to the exhibition hall, his mind working through the possibilities. If the smell had indeed come from the case, someone had found a way to introduce a substance, possibly a poisonous gas, into the sealed environment around the mask. But how? And more importantly, how would such a gas affect someone outside the case? He examined the display case minutely, looking for any flaw, any gap, any mechanism that might explain the mystery. The glass was flawless. The seals appeared intact. The base showed no signs of tampering. And yet, there, a tiny hole in the wooden base of the pedestal, almost invisible unless one knew what to look for. Poirot produced a magnifying glass from his pocket and examined it closely. The hole was freshly drilled, the edges sharp and clean. It led into the interior of the pedestal and potentially into the sealed case above.
Mr. Whitfield,
Poirot called to the security chief, who had been watching from a respectful distance.
I believe I have found something significant. Please summon Sir Malcolm and Dr. Crane immediately.
And contact Inspector Morrison. This is now officially a murder investigation. Chapter 4. Extended. The World of Egyptology. The days following the discovery of the poison mechanism were filled with intense investigation, as Poirot immersed himself in the world of Egyptology, a realm of passionate scholars, wealthy collectors, and bitter rivalries that had persisted for generations. He began by studying the history of the expedition that had discovered Amenhotep's tomb, learning about the personalities involved and the tensions that had simmered beneath the surface of professional cooperation. The picture that emerged was far more complex than the public accounts suggested. Dr. Edward Blackwood had been a controversial figure even before the expedition. His methods were considered aggressive by some of his colleagues, more concerned with making discoveries than with preserving archaeological context. He had clashed repeatedly with the Egyptian authorities over excavation permits, and there were rumors that he had acquired certain artifacts through less than legitimate channels. Edward was brilliant, but ruthless, one colleague told Poirot during an interview at the Royal Geographic Society. He believed that Western museums had a right, even a duty, to possess the treasures of ancient civilizations. He saw local populations as obstacles to be overcome, not partners to be consulted. Many of us disagreed with his approach, but none could deny his results. Did his methods create enemies? Countless enemies. Among the Egyptian authorities, certainly. Among rival archaeologists who felt he was giving the profession a bad name. And even among his own expedition members, who sometimes found his demands unreasonable. Dr. Helena Crane, for instance? Helena was a special case. She was arguably more talented than Edward, a better interpreter of inscriptions, a more careful excavator, a more insightful scholar. But she was a woman, in a field dominated by men, and Edward made sure she stayed in her place. He took credit for her discoveries, dismissed her opinions in public, treated her as an assistant rather than a colleague. If anyone had reason to resent him, it was Helena. This context helped Poirot understand the psychology that had driven Dr. Crane to murder. She had spent years being marginalized and undervalued, watching less capable men receive recognition for work she had done. When she discovered the secret chamber, she had seen an opportunity not just for wealth, but for revenge, a chance to take what the academic establishment had denied her. But understanding psychology was not the same as proving guilt. Poirot needed concrete evidence that would convince a jury, and for that, he needed to examine every aspect of the expedition's history. He spent a week reading through the official records, daily logs, inventory lists, correspondence, financial documents. The sheer volume of material was overwhelming, but Poirot's methodical approach eventually yielded results.
There are discrepancies in the artifact inventories,
he reported to Inspector Morrison.
Items that appear in the early catalogues, but not in the final shipment to England. Items that are described differently in various documents.
Someone was systematically altering the records to conceal theft. Can you prove who? The alterations are in Dr. Crane's handwriting. She was responsible for the inventory, and she used that responsibility to cover her crimes. That's useful, but it only proves theft, not murder. True, but theft is a thread that, when pulled, may unravel the entire fabric of deception. Chapter 5. Extended. The financial investigation. The financial aspects of the case proved equally illuminating. Lord Ashworth's records, obtained through his widow with considerable reluctance, revealed a pattern of expenditures that did not match the expedition's official accounts. There are payments to individuals who do not appear on the expedition roster, Poirot observed, examining the ledgers with Inspector Morrison. Large sums transferred to banks in Cairo and Geneva, with no explanation of their purpose. Bribes, perhaps. The expedition needed various permits and permissions. Some of them, certainly, but others. Poirot pointed to a series of entries. These payments began 6 months after the expedition returned to England. They continued until Lord Ashworth's death. Blackmail? That is my hypothesis. Someone was demanding payment to keep silent about something they knew. The question is, who? And what did they know? The answer emerged when Poirot traced the Geneva payments to an account registered to a company that, upon further investigation, proved to be controlled by Victor Stone. Stone was blackmailing Lord Ashworth, Poirot concluded. He knew about the stolen artifacts. He was helping to sell them, after all, and he demanded a share of Lord Ashworth's profits from the exhibition. But Lord Ashworth wasn't stealing artifacts. He was the financier, not the archaeologist. No, but he was receiving profits from an enterprise that he knew, or should have known, was tainted by theft. Stone threatened to expose the entire operation unless he received compensation. Lord Ashworth paid, but eventually decided that the payments must stop, which is when he became a liability to Dr. Crane. She killed him to protect Stone, who was blackmailing her partner. She killed him to protect herself. Stone's blackmail threatened to expose not just the theft, but the entire conspiracy, including the murders that had already been committed. By eliminating Lord Ashworth, she removed the victim who was most likely to confess under pressure. It's Byzantine. It is criminal, Inspector, and criminals, in my experience, are rarely simple. They build elaborate structures of deception, each crime leading to another, until they have created a labyrinth from which there is no escape. Chapter 6. Extended. The Egyptian Connection. The investigation also revealed the extent of the smuggling network that Dr. Crane had established. Working with Stone and various contacts in Egypt and Europe, she had moved dozens of artifacts from the tomb to private collectors, generating profits that far exceeded what she would have received through legitimate channels. The buyers were wealthy individuals with a taste for antiquities and a willingness to overlook questions of provenance. Poirot explained. They paid premium prices for the privilege of owning pieces that no museum would ever display, that no scholar would ever study, that would remain hidden in private vaults for generations. Can we recover them? Some, perhaps, but many have already been sold again, passed through multiple hands, scattered across the globe. The damage to the archaeological record is incalculable. This aspect of the case troubled Poirot deeply. He had solved the murders, exposed the criminals, brought the guilty to justice. But the knowledge that had been lost,
the context, the relationships between artifacts, the insights that could only come from proper excavation and documentation, could never be recovered. Dr. Crane had not merely stolen objects. She had stolen history itself.
"It is a crime against humanity," he said to Sir Malcolm during a final meeting at the museum. "These artifacts belong to everyone, to scholars, to students, to future generations who will want to understand their past. By removing them from their context and scattering them to private collections, Dr. Crane has robbed us all." The irony is that she considered herself an archaeologist, someone dedicated to preserving and understanding the past. She considered herself above the rules that govern others. She believed her talents entitled her to take what she wanted, regardless of the consequences. It is a form of arrogance that, in my experience, leads inevitably to disaster. And yet she was brilliant. You said so yourself. Brilliance without ethics is merely a more sophisticated form of destruction. Dr. Crane could have been one of the great archaeologists of her generation. Instead, she will be remembered as a thief and a murderer. The waste is almost as tragic as the crimes themselves. Chapter 7. Extended. The Hartwell Connection. Thomas Hartwell's death deserved additional scrutiny, and Poirot devoted considerable attention to understanding exactly how Dr. Crane had arranged the scaffold collapse. The key figure was Mahmoud, the Egyptian worker who had witnessed the fall and then vanished. Poirot made extensive inquiries through contacts in Cairo, eventually tracking Mahmoud to a village in Upper Egypt, where he had been living under a false name. "He was terrified when I found him," Inspector Morrison reported, having travelled to Egypt to interview the witness. "He thought we had come to kill him, like Doctor Crane had promised if he ever talked." "What did he say?" "Everything. Dr. Crane paid him to sabotage the scaffold, to cut through the support beams just enough that they would fail when someone of Hartwell's weight climbed onto the platform. The timing was random, but the result was guaranteed. Eventually, the scaffold would collapse, and whoever was on it would fall to their death." "Hartwell specifically, or anyone who happened to be there?" "Hartwell specifically. Dr. Crane told Mahmoud to report when Hartwell was on the scaffold, so she could position herself nearby as a witness. She wanted to be sure the collapse happened at the right moment, with the right victim." "She watched him die." "She watched and did nothing. Mahmoud said she seemed almost pleased, satisfied, like a job well done. The callousness was chilling, even for someone as experienced with criminal psychology as Poirot. Dr. Crane had not merely killed in a moment of passion or desperation. She had planned each death with cold precision, treating her victims as obstacles to be removed rather than human beings with lives and families. "She is a psychopath," Poirot concluded. "Intelligent, charming when necessary, but utterly lacking in empathy or remorse. Such individuals are rare, but not unheard of. History provides numerous examples of brilliant people who destroyed everything around them in pursuit of their goals." "Can that be used in her trial?" "It can be mentioned, but it is not a defense. Understanding why someone commits murder does not excuse the murder itself. Dr. Crane knew what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. That is the definition of criminal responsibility." Chapter 8. Extended. The curse's true nature. As the investigation wound toward its conclusion, Poirot found himself reflecting on the role that superstition had played in concealing the crimes. The curse of Amenhotep had provided perfect cover for murder.
each death attributed to supernatural vengeance rather than human malice. Each victim considered the latest casualty of an ancient power, rather than the target of a modern criminal. The genius of Dr. Crane's plan was its use of existing beliefs, he explained to a gathering of journalists after the trial. She did not need to create the superstition. It already existed, rooted in decades of stories about Egyptian curses and tomb raiders who met untimely ends. All she had to do was take advantage of it. "Do you believe there is anything to the curse legends?" one reporter asked. "I believe that human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. When someone dies after disturbing a tomb, we look for connections, for explanations that make sense of random tragedy. The curse provides such an explanation, simpler and more satisfying than the truth, which is that accidents happen, diseases strike, and sometimes people simply die." But 4 deaths in 18 months, surely that's more than coincidence. It is certainly more than coincidence. It is murder, carefully planned and executed to look like coincidence. Dr. Crane counted on the curse legend to deflect suspicion, and for a time it worked. But no deception can survive forever. The truth always emerges, eventually. And the inscription on the mask? "He who disturbs the rest of Amenhotep shall know the wrath of the gods." That wasn't a real curse. It was a real inscription, written 3,000 years ago by priests who hoped to protect their king's tomb from robbers. Whether they believed in its supernatural power, we cannot know. But the power it had was entirely human. The power to frighten, to mislead, to provide cover for crimes that had nothing to do with ancient gods. So, the curse was just a tool. The curse was an idea. Ideas have power, but only the power we give them. Dr. Crane gave the curse power by using it to conceal her crimes. When we exposed those crimes, the curse lost its power, became just words on a golden mask. Impressive, but ultimately meaningless. Chapter 9. Extended. The family's aftermath. The Blackwood family, devastated by the loss of 2 members, faced a long process of healing that would extend far beyond the trial and its resolution. William Blackwood, the sole surviving heir to Dr. Edward Blackwood's legacy, found himself in an unexpected position. With his father's and brother's deaths avenged, he was forced to consider what role, if any, he wanted to play in the world of Egyptology that had claimed so much from his family. "I've been offered positions at several universities," he told Poirot during a final meeting. "They want me to continue my father's work, to build on his discoveries. But every time I consider it, I think of Robert, of father, of all the death and deception that surrounded the expedition." "The work itself was valuable," Poirot observed. "The discoveries your father made have advanced our understanding of ancient Egypt significantly. That value exists independently of the crimes committed around it." "I know, and part of me wants to honor his memory by carrying on his research. But another part of me wants to walk away, to build a life that has nothing to do with tombs and treasures and curses." "What will you choose?" "I don't know yet. Perhaps both. Perhaps I can honor my father's work while also creating something new, something that isn't shadowed by tragedy." William smiled sadly. Robert would have known what to do. He always did. "Your brother was a remarkable young man. His investigation, his determination to find the truth. Without that, Dr. Crane might have escaped justice. At least his death meant something. At least it led to answers." William paused. "Do you think he knew? At the end, I mean. Do you think he understood what was happening to him? I cannot say with certainty, but the evidence suggests that the poison worked quickly, faster than conscious thought. If there was a moment of understanding, it would have been very brief.
I hope so. I hope he didn't suffer.
I believe he did not, and I believe he would be proud of what his investigation accomplished, even if he did not live to see its conclusion. Lady Ashworth, widow of the expedition's financier, faced a different kind of reckoning. Her husband's involvement in the smuggling operation, however passive, had tainted his memory and complicated her position in society.
People look at me differently now, she told Poirot when he visited to inform her of the trial's outcome. They wonder how much I knew, whether I was complicit in my husband's crimes. The truth is that I knew nothing until you exposed it all. Your husband was a victim, Lady Ashworth. He was used by Dr. Crane and murdered when he became inconvenient. That should not be forgotten. But the blackmail payments, the connection to the smuggling network, those facts remain. My husband may have been a victim, but he was also a participant. He could have gone to the authorities, could have exposed the operation, could have done the right thing. Instead, he paid and stayed silent. Fear is a powerful motivation. Your husband may have believed that exposure would ruin him, destroy everything he had worked for. Doctor, Crane and Stone were skilled at making their victims feel trapped, complicit, unable to escape.
That doesn't excuse it.
No, but it explains it. And explanation, while not the same as absolution, can sometimes provide a path toward understanding and peace. Chapter 5. The Mechanism Revealed. The examination of the pedestal revealed a sophisticated mechanism that made Poirot's grey cells tingle with professional admiration, even as his conscience recoiled at its deadly purpose. Concealed within the wooden base was a small, pressurized canister connected to a tube that led through the hole Poirot had discovered, emerging inside the sealed case beneath the golden mask.
"It's ingenious," Dr. Crane said, her voice a mixture of horror and reluctant respect.
The canister contains a gas, hydrogen cyanide.
According to the preliminary analysis. When triggered, it releases a measured dose into the case. The gas disperses quickly, but for a few moments, anyone standing close to the case would inhale a potentially fatal amount.
"But the case is sealed," Sir Malcolm protested. "How could the gas escape?"
There are microscopic gaps in the seal, invisible to the naked eye, but sufficient to allow gas exchange. The designer counted on the fact that museum cases are never perfectly airtight. Dr. Crane pointed to the seams of the glass. The gas would seep out gradually, dissipating into the surrounding air. Anyone who happened to be standing nearby at the moment of release would receive the full dose.
"And the trigger mechanism?"
Poirot asked. That's the clever part. It's pressure sensitive, connected to the floor in front of the case. When someone of sufficient weight stands on the trigger point, the canister activates. It's random. Anyone could trigger it, which is why none of the previous deaths could be predicted.
Except that they weren't random at all,
Poirot observed.
The trigger only activates when someone approaches the mask closely.
And who would approach the mask closely?
Scholars, researchers, those with special access, and those with personal connections to the expedition.
Like Robert Blackwood, Morrison said grimly.
Precisely. The killer knew that the victims would eventually come to see the mask, would stand in exactly the spot where the trigger was concealed. The curse provided perfect cover. Each death appeared natural, connected to the legendary supernatural danger.
when in fact it was carefully engineered murder.
But who?
Sir Malcolm demanded.
Who could have designed such a thing? Who would want these people dead?
That, Poirot said, is what we must now determine. We know the method. We must discover the motive and the murderer. The investigation shifted focus from the supernatural to the mechanical, from ancient curses to modern crimes. Poirot requested a complete inventory of everyone who had had access to the exhibition hall during the installation of the artifacts, as well as detailed backgrounds on all the victims. The list of potential suspects was substantial. Museum staff had been in and out constantly during the weeks of preparation. Contractors had been hired to build the displays and install the lighting. Special consultants had been brought in to advise on Egyptian antiquities and conservation. Any of them might have had the opportunity to install the deadly mechanism. But opportunity alone was not sufficient. Poirot needed to understand motive, and for that, he needed to understand the relationships between the victims more deeply. 4 men are dead, he mused to Morrison. Dr. Edward Blackwood, leader of the expedition, Thomas Hartwell, his assistant, Lord Ashworth, the financier, and Robert Blackwood, the son. What connects them beyond the obvious link to the tomb? They were all involved in the discovery. They all benefited from it in some way. Yes, but who benefited from their deaths? That is the question we must answer. The answer, when it came, emerged from an unexpected source: the expedition's financial records, which Poirot obtained through a combination of legal process and diplomatic pressure. The profits from the exhibition were to be divided according to a contract signed before the expedition began, he explained to the assembled investigators. Dr. Blackwood received 30% as expedition leader. Lord Ashworth received 50% as primary financier. The remaining 20% was divided among the other senior staff, including Dr. Crane and Thomas Hartwell. And when Blackwood died, his share passed to his heirs, his sons Robert and William. When Lord Ashworth died, his share reverted to the museum under the terms of the contract, since he had no children and his wife waived her claim. And when Thomas Hartwell died, his share went to his designated beneficiary, Morrison finished.
Who was that?
Poirot consulted his notes.
Dr. Helena Crane.
The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Crane benefits from multiple deaths, Morrison said slowly. Hartwell's share came to her directly, and with the Blackwoods and Lord Ashworth dead, she becomes the expedition's sole surviving senior member, the only one left to claim academic credit for the discovery. We cannot jump to conclusions, Poirot cautioned. Dr. Crane had an alibi for Robert Blackwood's death, and the mechanism in the pedestal required specialized knowledge of chemistry, of engineering, of the museum's security systems. She's a scientist. She could have the chemistry knowledge. Perhaps, but there is more to consider. The first death, Dr. Edward Blackwood, occurred in Egypt, not England. The fever that killed him was witnessed by many people. How does that fit with our poisoning theory? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe the first death really was natural, and the killer took advantage of it, used it as cover for the subsequent murders. An interesting hypothesis. But we need evidence, not speculation. Poirot rose from his chair. I must speak with Dr. Crane again, and I must also learn more about Thomas Hartwell's death, the fall from the scaffold. That too deserves closer examination.
Chapter 6. The Fall. Thomas Hartwell had died 6 months after Dr. Blackwood, during the process of removing artifacts from the tomb and preparing them for transport to England. According to the official account, he had been supervising workers on a scaffold erected to access the tomb's upper chambers when the structure collapsed, sending him plunging 30 feet to the stone floor below.
It was an accident,
Dr. Crane insisted when Poirot questioned her about the incident.
The scaffold was old, poorly maintained, a cost-cutting measure by the Egyptian authorities who provided our equipment. Thomas was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet you inherited his share of the expedition's profits as a result of his death. I was his designated beneficiary, yes. We were close. We had discussed marriage, in fact, though we never formally announced an engagement. His death devastated me. You were lovers.
Dr. Crane's composure flickered.
We were partners, in every sense of the word, personal and professional. We worked together for 5 years before the expedition, and we planned to continue working together afterward.
His death was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And yet, you have prospered since. His share of the profits, your elevation to chief curator, your name attached to the greatest archaeological discovery of the century. I would trade all of it to have Thomas back. Dr. Crane's voice was fierce. You may find that difficult to believe, Monsieur Poirot, but it is the truth. I loved him. I still love him. And I will not sit here and be accused of killing him for money. I am not accusing you, Dr. Crane. I'm trying to understand. Someone has committed multiple murders, using ingenious methods that required knowledge and planning. I must consider every possibility, however painful. Then consider this possibility. I am not the only person who had reason to want these men dead. Edward Blackwood made enemies throughout his career. Lord Ashworth's financial dealings were not always above reproach. And Thomas discovered something in that tomb, something he never told me about, something that frightened him. What did he discover? I don't know. He said he couldn't tell me, not until he was certain. He said it would change everything. Our understanding of the tomb, the expedition, perhaps even the historical record. But before he could explain, he died. And you never learned what it was? I searched his papers, his notes, everything I could find. There was nothing. Whatever Thomas discovered, he took it to his grave. Poirot filed this information away for future consideration. A secret discovery, a suspicious death, a mystery within a mystery. The case was becoming more complex with each new revelation. His next step was to investigate the scaffold collapse itself. The Egyptian authorities had conducted an inquiry at the time, and their report was part of the expedition's records. Poirot obtained a copy and studied it carefully. The official conclusion was accidental death due to equipment failure. The scaffold had been constructed of substandard materials and had not been properly inspected before use. When Hartwell's weight caused a support beam to crack, the entire structure had collapsed. But there were details in the report that troubled Poirot. Multiple witnesses had seen Hartwell on the scaffold moments before the collapse, but only one had actually witnessed the fall itself. A local worker named Mahmoud, who claimed to have seen Hartwell lose his balance and grab for a support beam that gave way. Mahmoud's testimony was suspiciously detailed, almost as though he had been prepared to explain exactly what happened. And there was another curious fact. Mahmoud had left the expedition immediately after Hartwell's death and had never been seen again.
A convenient witness who vanishes afterward, Poirot murmured to himself. That is not the behaviour of an innocent man. He made a note to inquire about Mahmoud's whereabouts, though he suspected the search would prove futile. Witnesses who disappeared after suspicious deaths rarely wished to be found. Chapter 7. The Brothers' Secret. William Blackwood proved to be a more complex figure than his initial appearance suggested. Beneath the grief-stricken brother mourning his lost family lay a man with secrets of his own, secrets that emerged gradually as Poirot's investigation continued. Your brother Robert was convinced the curse was real, Poirot said during their second interview. But you seem less certain. You spoke of imagination, of fear, as though you knew something that Robert did not. William shifted uncomfortably. Robert was always the romantic one. He believed in things, spirits, ancient powers, the supernatural. I was more practical, more skeptical. And yet you came to the museum this morning. You were here when your brother died. I came to support him. He insisted on attending the opening, said he needed to face his fears. I thought being there might help him stay calm. Or perhaps you had another reason for wanting to be present. William's face went pale. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that you knew more about your brother's death than you have revealed. I am suggesting that you may have known it was coming. That's absurd! How could I possibly? Because you knew about the mechanism in the pedestal. You knew that anyone who approached the mask closely would be exposed to poison gas. And you knew that your brother, driven by his obsession with the curse, would inevitably stand in exactly that spot. No, that's not true. Then explain to me why you positioned yourself on the opposite side of the hall, as far from the mask as possible. Explain why you made no attempt to approach the case yourself. Explain why you watched your brother walk toward his death and did nothing to stop him. William's composure crumbled. I didn't know he would die. I swear I didn't. I only knew there was danger. How did you know? I received a letter. Anonymous, typed, no return address. It warned me to stay away from the golden mask, said that anyone who approached it closely would suffer the same fate as my father. I thought it was a crank, some superstitious fool trying to frighten me. But I took precautions anyway. I kept my distance, just in case. And you didn't warn your brother? I tried. I told him about the letter, told him to stay away from the mask. But he wouldn't listen. He said I was being paranoid, that the curse was in our blood and we couldn't escape it by running. He insisted on confronting it directly. William's voice broke. I should have stopped him. I should have physically dragged him away. But I thought maybe he was right. Maybe it was all nonsense. And now he's dead. This letter, do you still have it? Yes, I kept it. I don't know why. Some instinct, perhaps. I should like to see it immediately. The letter, when produced, confirmed Poirot's suspicions. It was typed on ordinary paper with no identifying marks, but the phrasing, the specific warnings about approaching the mask, suggested that the author knew exactly how the murders were being committed. The killer sent this, Poirot said. He, or she, wanted to ensure that you survived while your brother died. But why? What purpose would it serve to spare one brother while killing the other? I don't know. I've been asking myself the same question. Think carefully, Mr. Blackwood. Is there any difference between you and Robert in terms of the expedition? Any reason why one of you might be more dangerous to the killer than the other? William was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, his expression changed. Understanding dawning, followed by something that looked like fear. Robert knew something he wouldn't tell me. He said he had figured out what really happened to our father. Not the curse, but the truth. He said he had evidence, proof that would expose everything. Evidence of what? I don't know. He wouldn't say. He was saving it for the exhibition, said he was going to make a public announcement, reveal the truth to everyone. William's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone killed him to stop him from talking. Someone who knew what he had discovered. And that someone also wanted to ensure you survived, perhaps because you do not share your brother's knowledge. I suppose so. I knew Robert was investigating Father's death, but he never told me what he found. He said it was too dangerous, that the fewer people who knew, the better. Too dangerous. A common phrase in murder cases, usually meaning that the speaker was trying to protect someone, often themselves, but sometimes others. Robert Blackwood had been trying to protect his brother by keeping him ignorant, and in doing so, had inadvertently marked himself for death. The evidence your brother mentioned, where would he have kept it? His flat, I suppose. Or possibly a safety deposit box. Robert was paranoid about security. I will need to search both. And I will need access to any papers or correspondence he left behind. Whatever you need, Monsieur Poirot. I want the person who killed my brother to face justice, whether it's an ancient curse or a modern murderer. It is most certainly the latter, Poirot assured him. And I intend to prove it. Chapter 8. Robert's Discovery. The search of Robert Blackwood's flat revealed a man obsessed. Every wall was covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes about the expedition and its victims. Maps of the tomb site were annotated with questions and observations. Medical reports, autopsy results, and witness statements were filed in meticulous order. But the most significant discovery was a locked drawer in Robert's desk, which contained a single item, a journal written by his father during the expedition. The journal had been hidden, Robert's notes indicated, in a secret compartment of the artifacts shipped back to England. Robert had discovered it only recently, while helping prepare the exhibition. Dr. Blackwood's personal journal, Poirot said, examining the worn leather cover. The expedition's official records contain no mention of this. Father was a secretive man, William confirmed. He kept his private thoughts separate from his professional work. The journal's contents proved explosive. Dr. Edward Blackwood had documented not only the discovery of the tomb, but also a growing suspicion that someone on the expedition was sabotaging the work, stealing artifacts, falsifying records, and perhaps planning worse. I have seen things that trouble me deeply, one entry read. Objects disappearing from the inventory, only to reappear days later in different locations. Photographs that do not match my memories of the excavation. And Helena. Her behavior has become increasingly erratic. She spends hours alone in the tomb, claiming to be conducting research. But I have seen her emerge with nothing to show for her time. What is she really doing down there? Helena. Dr. Helena Crane, who had inherited Thomas Hartwell's share of the profits, who had risen to prominence on the backs of dead colleagues, who had been alone in her office when Robert Blackwood died. But the journal's most damning revelation came near the end.
in an entry written just days before Dr. Blackwood's fatal illness. I have discovered what Helena is hiding. There is a second chamber, a secret room concealed behind the main burial vault,
containing treasures that dwarf everything we have found so far. Helena found it weeks ago and has been removing items secretly, selling them through contacts in Cairo. When I confronted her, she denied everything. But I have the evidence. Photographs, receipts, even a confession from one of her buyers. Tomorrow, I will present this evidence to Lord Ashworth and demand that Helena be removed from the expedition. She has betrayed us all, and she must face the consequences. Tomorrow. But tomorrow had never come. At least, not for Dr. Edward Blackwood. He had died of a mysterious fever before he could present his evidence, and the secret chamber's existence had remained hidden. "She killed him," William said, his voice hollow. "Dr. Crane killed my father to protect her smuggling operation." It would appear so, but we must be careful. The journal is evidence, but it is not proof. We need to establish that Dr. Crane had the means and opportunity to poison your father, and that she was responsible for the subsequent deaths as well. The fever. Could that have been poison too? Possibly. Certain toxins can produce symptoms that mimic infectious disease. If Dr. Crane had access to such substances, and if she could administer them without detection. She was there, at the dig in the camp. She had access to Father's food, his water, everything. Yes, and she had motive. The evidence your father had gathered would have destroyed her career and possibly sent her to prison. Killing him eliminated the threat and allowed her to continue her theft. But why the others? Thomas Hartwell, Lord Ashworth, my brother Robert. Hartwell may have known about the secret chamber, or suspected. His death removed a potential witness. Lord Ashworth controlled the finances of the expedition. If he had discovered discrepancies in the accounts, he too would have been a threat. And Robert. Poirot paused, fitting the pieces together. Robert discovered your father's journal. He was going to reveal everything at the exhibition. Dr. Crane could not allow that. Then we have her. The journal proves everything. The journal proves motive. But we still need to connect Dr. Crane to the murder mechanism. The canister, the trigger, the technical knowledge required to build such a device. How do we do that? By finding the person who helped her. Someone designed that mechanism. Someone with engineering skills that Dr. Crane may not possess. We find that person. We find our proof. Chapter 2. Extended. The exhibition's preparations. The weeks leading up to the Golden Pharaoh Exhibition had been filled with intense activity, and Poirot made it his business to understand every aspect of the preparations. The more he learned, the more he appreciated the complexity of the operation, and the many opportunities it had provided for someone with criminal intentions. The artifacts had arrived in England 6 months before the exhibition opened, transported in specially designed crates that were supposed to protect them from damage during the long sea voyage. Each piece had been carefully catalogued in Egypt before departure, and the manifest was checked against the actual contents upon arrival in London. Everything matched, Sir Malcolm assured Poirot. We verified every item against the original inventory. There were no discrepancies. The original inventory prepared by Dr. Crane? Yes, she was responsible for the final cataloguing before shipment. And you trusted her assessment completely. She was the expedition's chief curator after Dr. Blackwood's death. We have no reason to doubt her competence or her honesty. No reason, except that she was a murderer and a thief who had been manipulating records for over a year. Poirot made a mental note to have the inventory re-examined by an independent expert, though he suspected the audit would reveal nothing. Dr. Crane was too careful to leave obvious evidence of her crimes. The installation of the exhibition had taken 3 months, involving dozens of workers and specialists. Display cases had been designed and constructed, lighting systems installed, security measures implemented. Every detail had been planned with meticulous attention, including, it now appeared, the deadly mechanism that had claimed Robert Blackwood's life. "Walk me through the installation process," Poirot requested of James Whitfield. "Specifically, the installation of the golden masks display." The pedestal was built by Victor Stone's company, according to specifications provided by Dr. Crane. It arrived about 6 weeks before the opening and was installed by Stone's workers. The case was mounted on top, the mask was placed inside, and the whole assembly was connected to our alarm system. Did anyone inspect the pedestal's interior before it was sealed? We didn't think to. Stone's reputation was excellent, and the design was supposedly state-of-the-art. We assumed everything was as specified. You assumed. And now a man is dead because of that assumption. Whitfield's face crumpled with guilt. I should have checked. I should have verified every component, every mechanism. But there was so much to do, so little time. You are not to blame, Mr. Whitfield. You were deceived by people who were skilled at deception. But let this be a lesson. In matters of security, assumption is the enemy of vigilance. The lesson, Poirot reflected, applied to more than security systems. Throughout the case, assumptions had allowed Dr. Crane to operate undetected. Assumptions that the curse was responsible for the deaths. Assumptions that a respected archaeologist would never commit murder. Assumptions that elaborate security measures could not be subverted from within. Each assumption had been a shield behind which evil had flourished, until the accumulated weight of evidence finally broke through and exposed the truth. Chapter 3. Extended. The medical evidence. Dr. James Morrison, the museum's consulting physician, provided crucial testimony about the medical aspects of the case. He had examined all 4 victims, or rather, he had examined the evidence related to their deaths, since the first 3 had occurred before his involvement. The poison used was hydrogen cyanide, he explained to Poirot during a detailed interview. It's a fast-acting agent that interferes with cellular respiration. Essentially, it prevents the body from using oxygen at the cellular level. Death occurs within minutes, sometimes seconds, depending on the concentration. And the symptoms? Initially, the victim experiences dizziness, shortness of breath, and rapid heartbeat. This progresses quickly to convulsions, loss of consciousness, and cardiac arrest. To an outside observer, it would appear very much like a heart attack, which is exactly what the killer intended. The terror on the victims' faces. Is that consistent with cyanide poisoning? It's consistent with hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. The brain, deprived of oxygen, can produce all sorts of sensations and experiences, including intense fear. It's possible the victims genuinely believed they were experiencing something supernatural in their final moments. So the curse, in a sense, became self-fulfilling. The victims died in terror, reinforcing the belief that they had been struck down by ancient powers. A cruel irony. Dr. Crane used their own fear against them, turning superstition into a weapon. The medical evidence also helped explain the deaths of Dr. Edward Blackwood and Thomas Hartwell, which had not involved the museum mechanism. Blackwood's fever had been caused by a different poison, arsenic, administered in small doses over several days, producing symptoms that mimicked various infectious diseases. Arsenic poisoning was once called inheritance powder because it was so commonly used to hasten the deaths of wealthy relatives, Morrison noted. It's easily obtainable, difficult to detect, and produces symptoms that can be attributed to many natural causes. Dr. Crane must have added it to Blackwood's food, or water, over a period of days, gradually building up the fatal dose. And Thomas Hartwell? His death was mechanical, not chemical. The scaffold collapse killed him instantly. There was no poison involved, just gravity and sabotage. Dr. Crane varied her methods to avoid detection. Exactly. If all the deaths had been identical, someone might have suspected a pattern. By varying the causes, disease, accident, heart attack, she created the appearance of coincidence rather than design. The curse provided the unifying explanation. The curse made the coincidences seem meaningful. It transformed random deaths into a coherent narrative, divine vengeance against those who had disturbed the pharaoh's rest. People wanted to believe in the curse, and Dr. Crane gave them what they wanted. Chapter 10. Extended. The Trial. The trial of Dr. Helena Crane was one of the most sensational in British legal history, combining the glamour of Egyptian antiquities with the horror of calculated murder. The courtroom was packed every day, with crowds gathering outside to catch glimpses of the defendant and the famous detective who had exposed her crimes. Poirot was called as a key witness for the prosecution, and his testimony provided the framework within which all the other evidence made sense. He described the investigation step by step, from the discovery of the poison mechanism to the recovery of Dr. Blackwood's journal, from the confession of Victor Stone to the tracing of the smuggled artifacts. The defense attempted to challenge his conclusions, suggesting that Stone was the real mastermind and that Dr. Crane had been manipulated by a more sophisticated criminal intelligence. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the jury clearly found her own confession, recorded by the police officers who had arrested her, to be definitive. "I did what I had to do," she had said. "I took what I deserved. If that makes me a criminal, then so be it." The prosecution argued that this statement demonstrated not remorse, but defiance, the attitude of someone who believed herself above the law and was willing to kill to prove it. The jury agreed, returning guilty verdicts on all counts of murder and conspiracy. The sentencing phase was equally dramatic. Character witnesses testified about Dr. Crane's contributions to archaeology, her brilliance as a scholar, her potential that had been corrupted by resentment and ambition. But the judge was unmoved, pronouncing a death sentence that he described as the only appropriate response to crimes of such calculation and cruelty. Dr. Crane received the sentence without visible emotion, maintaining the composed demeanor she had displayed throughout the trial. Only when she was led from the courtroom did she show any reaction, turning to look at the gallery where Poirot sat and offering him a slight nod that might have been respect, or might have been something darker. "She acknowledges you as a worthy opponent," Morrison observed. "Is that common among criminals you've captured?" "Some criminals see detection as a game, a contest of wits between themselves and those who pursue them. Dr. Crane was one such. She enjoyed the challenge of evading justice, and she recognizes that I provided that challenge. Does that trouble you?" It reminds me that intelligence can be a curse as well as a blessing. Dr. Crane's mind was her greatest asset and her greatest flaw. It allowed her to conceive elaborate schemes of theft and murder, but it also convinced her that she was too clever to be caught. In the end, her own brilliance was her undoing. Chapter 11 Extended: Legacy and Reflection. In the months following the trial, Poirot found himself called upon to lecture about the case at various institutions, scientific societies, legal academies, even the occasional dinner party where guests wanted to hear about the Golden Pharaoh mystery from the detective who had solved it. He spoke about the intersection of superstition and crime, about the ways that belief systems could be exploited by those with criminal intentions. He discussed the importance of evidence over assumption, the need to question accepted narratives, the value of persistence in the face of seemingly inexplicable phenomena. The curse of Amenhotep was not real, he would conclude, but the human capacity for evil is very real indeed. We must be vigilant against both the supernatural fears that cloud our judgment and the natural wickedness that walks among us wearing the mask of respectability. The case also prompted reflection about the ethics of archaeology itself. Dr. Crane's crimes had been motivated partly by resentment of the systems that had marginalized her, but they had also exposed broader problems in the field, the inequities that existed between Western institutions and the countries whose heritage they claimed to study, the lack of accountability for artifacts once they left their original contexts, the ease with which smuggling networks could exploit the demand for antiquities. Dr. Crane was not the only person who profited from the exploitation of Egyptian heritage, Poirot observed to Sir Malcolm during one of their final conversations. She was simply the most extreme. The entire system that enabled her crimes, the collectors who bought stolen artifacts, the institutions that accepted them without question, the governments that failed to enforce protections, all share some responsibility for what happened. You're suggesting that Egyptology itself is corrupt? I am suggesting that any field that deals in valuable objects creates opportunities for corruption, and that vigilance is required to prevent those opportunities from being exploited. Dr. Crane was a symptom of a larger disease. Treating the symptom is important, but curing the disease requires more fundamental changes. It was a message that many in the archaeological establishment did not want to hear, but Poirot delivered it anyway. Justice, he believed, was not merely about punishing individual criminals. It was about understanding the conditions that allowed crime to flourish and working to change them. The golden mask of Amenhotep the Magnificent continued to draw crowds to the British Museum, its beauty undimmed by the tragedy that had surrounded its journey from tomb to exhibition hall. Visitors gazed upon the serene face of the long-dead pharaoh and felt the weight of 3,000 years pressing upon them, connecting them to a past that was both alien and intimately familiar. And somewhere in the depths of the mask's unseeing eyes, the curse, whatever it had been, whatever it meant, waited for the next person foolish enough to believe in it. Such was the power of legend. Such was the persistence of superstition. And such was the eternal challenge facing those who sought to distinguish truth from fiction, in a world where both had the power to kill. Final reflections. Poirot's involvement with the Golden Pharaoh case marked an important moment in his career, a demonstration that even the most elaborate supernatural explanations could conceal mundane human crimes, and that the methods of scientific detection were always superior to superstition and fear. He kept the lapis lazuli scarab on his mantelpiece for the rest of his life, a reminder of the case and its lessons. Visitors sometimes asked about it, and he would tell them the story, edited for discretion, of course, but capturing the essential truth of how ancient and modern had collided in a mystery that spanned continents and millennia. The pharaohs believed in magic, he would say, and perhaps magic exists in forms we do not understand. But I believe in evidence, in reason, in the power of the human mind to uncover truth. That power has served me well, and it will serve anyone who applies it with diligence and integrity. It was a philosophy that had guided his entire career, and it would continue to guide him through the many cases that followed. The Golden Pharaoh mystery was solved, its criminals punished, its victims avenged. But the work of justice never ended. There was always another puzzle, another deception, another opportunity to exercise the grey cells in service of truth. Such was the life of Hercule Poirot. Such was the calling he had chosen, and such was the satisfaction he found in a job well done. Chapter 9. The Accomplice. The search for Dr. Crane's accomplice led Poirot back through the museum's records, examining every contractor and consultant who had worked on the exhibition. The list was long, but one name stood out. A man named Victor Stone, described as a specialist in museum security systems. Victor Stone, Poirot repeated, reviewing the file. He was hired to design the protective measures for the most valuable artifacts, including the golden mask. His work included the pedestal and display case. You think he built the poison mechanism? Morrison asked. I think it would have been difficult for anyone else. The mechanism was concealed within the pedestal he designed. It would have been simple for him to include it during construction, claiming it was part of the security system. But why would he help Dr. Crane commit murder? That is what we must discover. Perhaps he was paid. Perhaps he was blackmailed. Or perhaps he has his own connection to the expedition that we have not yet uncovered. Stone's background proved illuminating. He had no apparent connection to Egyptology or archaeology, but he had a long history in the security industry and a criminal record that had been carefully concealed from his museum employers. Fraud and conspiracy, Morrison noted, reading from the police file. 10 years ago, he was investigated for helping a collector steal artifacts from a private museum. The charges were dropped for lack of evidence, but the suspicion remained. Artifact theft. And Dr. Crane was stealing artifacts from the tomb. Poirot's grey cells made the connection instantly. Stone was her partner, not just in the museum killings, but in the original smuggling operation. He was the contact in Cairo, the buyer mentioned in Dr. Blackwood's journal. That would explain the collaboration. They were protecting not just their reputations, but their ongoing criminal enterprise. Precisely. The deaths were not merely about silencing witnesses. They were about maintaining control of a lucrative smuggling network that has been operating since the tomb was first discovered. Stone was located at his workshop in East London, a cluttered space filled with security equipment and technical apparatus. When confronted with the evidence, the mechanism from the pedestal, the journal entries, his criminal history, he attempted to flee, but was quickly apprehended by the police officers Morrison had positioned outside. I want a lawyer, Stone said, his face pale with fear. You will have one, Poirot assured him. But perhaps first, you would like to explain your relationship with Dr. Helena Crane. I don't know anyone by that name. That is curious, because the receipts in Dr. Blackwood's journal describe transactions with a buyer named V. Stone, operating out of Cairo. You were in Cairo 18 months ago, were you not? Working as a security consultant for the Egyptian government.
Stone's silence was answer enough. You helped Dr. Crane smuggle artifacts from the tomb. You helped her silence those who discovered the truth, and you designed the mechanism that killed 4 innocent people.
I didn't know what it was for. Helena, Dr. Crane, she said it was a security measure, a way to protect the artifacts from theft.
I thought she was just being cautious. You thought a device designed to release poison gas was a security measure.
I didn't know it was poison. She said it was a deterrent, a harmless gas that would trigger alarms and drive away anyone who tried to touch the mask. I had no idea she was using it to kill people.
It was a pathetic defense, and Stone clearly knew it. His shoulders slumped in defeat. She used me, just like she used everyone else. I thought we were partners, thought we were going to make a fortune together from the artifacts. But she was always 3 steps ahead, always planning, always protecting herself.
Tell me everything, from the beginning.
The story that emerged was one of greed, betrayal, and murder that had begun almost 2 years earlier, when Dr. Helena Crane first discovered the secret chamber hidden behind Amenhotep's burial vault. She found it by accident, Stone explained. A loose stone in the wall, and behind it, more gold than anyone had ever seen. She knew immediately that she couldn't share the discovery. The official expedition would claim everything, divide the profits according to the contract, leave her with almost nothing. So she decided to take what she could before anyone else learned the truth. And she recruited you to help. I was already in Cairo, working on security systems for some of the government buildings. She approached me through a mutual contact, offered me a percentage of whatever she could sell. I agreed. It seemed like easy money at the time.
When did it become murder?
Stone's face contorted with something that might have been regret. Doctor. Blackwood found out. I don't know how. Maybe he noticed artifacts going missing. Maybe he found the secret chamber himself. Helena said he was going to expose everything, ruin both of us. She said she had a plan to stop him. The poison. She had contacts in Cairo who could supply certain substances. She put something in his water, made it look like a fever. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was too late. And Thomas Hartwell? He was getting suspicious, asking questions, looking too closely at the inventory records. Helena arranged the scaffold collapse, bribed one of the local workers to cut through the support beams at just the right moment. The witness who disappeared, Mahmoud. He was paid well and sent far away. I don't know where he is now. Helena handled all of that. And Lord Ashworth? He was becoming a problem. The financial records showed discrepancies that he was starting to notice. Helena couldn't poison him in Egypt, too suspicious after Blackwood, so she waited until the artifacts came to England. That's when she asked me to build the device. You agreed to create a murder weapon. I thought it would only be used once, on Ashworth, to silence him before he could expose us. I didn't know she was planning to keep using it, to kill anyone who got too close. But you knew when Robert Blackwood died. You knew he had been killed by your device. By then it was too late. I was already an accomplice to murder. If I came forward, I would go to prison for the rest of my life. Helena made sure I understood that. She had evidence that could implicate me in everything, and she wouldn't hesitate to use it. So you kept silent while innocent people died. I kept silent to save myself. I'm not proud of it. But I won't take the blame alone. Helena is the one who planned all of this, who decided who would live and who would die. I was just the tool she used. A tool that will spend many years in prison, Poirot observed. But you may reduce your sentence by cooperating fully with the authorities. Tell Inspector Morrison everything you know about Dr. Crane's operations, the artifacts she stole, the buyers she sold them to, the evidence she has against you. Hold nothing back. And then what? And then justice will be served. For Dr. Edward Blackwood, for Thomas Hartwell, for Lord Ashworth, and for Robert Blackwood. 4 men whose deaths were made to look like an ancient curse, but who were murdered by a woman who believed herself above the law. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. Dr. Helena Crane was arrested at her flat the following morning, surrounded by artifacts that subsequent investigation would prove had been stolen from the Egyptian tomb. She offered no resistance, merely smiled coldly as the officers placed her in handcuffs. "I knew this day would come eventually," she said, when Poirot arrived to witness the arrest. "I had hoped to have more time, but circumstances intervened." The circumstances being Robert Blackwood's discovery of his father's journal. That damned journal! Edward always was too careful, too methodical. He documented everything, even his own suspicions. I searched for it after he died, but I never found it. I assumed it had been lost or destroyed. It was hidden in the artifacts you shipped to England, hidden by a man who trusted no one, not even his colleagues. Especially not his colleagues. Edward knew someone on the expedition was stealing from him, but he could never prove who. He became paranoid toward the end, suspicious of everyone, including me. With good reason, it seems. With excellent reason. But he made the mistake of confronting me before he had all the evidence. I was able to act first. "You poisoned him." A simple compound, easily obtained in Cairo. It produces symptoms identical to certain local infections: fever, delirium, rapid deterioration. The doctors never suspected anything other than natural illness. And Thomas Hartwell? Was his death also a simple matter? For the first time, Crane's composure flickered. Thomas was different. He genuinely didn't know about the secret chamber. I kept that from him, even though we were close. But he was starting to ask questions, putting pieces together. I couldn't risk him figuring out the truth. So you arranged his death? I paid Mahmoud to sabotage the scaffold. It was supposed to look like an accident, and it did. No one suspected anything. No one except Robert Blackwood, who spent years investigating his father's death. Robert was a persistent nuisance. He never believed the curse explanation, never stopped digging. When I learned he had found Edward's journal, I knew I had to act quickly. Hence the poison mechanism in the pedestal. Victor's design was elegant, I'll give him that. Random enough to avoid suspicion, lethal enough to guarantee results. Lord Ashworth was the first test. I lured him to the museum with a private viewing, positioned him near the mask, and let the device do its work. And Robert Blackwood? He was going to announce his findings at the exhibition opening. I couldn't allow that. I knew he would come to see the mask, his father's greatest discovery, and I knew exactly where he would stand when he did. You murdered 4 people to protect your smuggling operation. I murdered 4 people to protect my life's work. Crane's voice turned fierce. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a woman in archaeology? To spend years doing brilliant work, only to watch men take credit for your discoveries. I found that secret chamber. I deciphered the inscriptions, catalogued the artifacts, understood their significance. And what would I have received under the expedition's contract? A tiny fraction of the profits, a footnote in the official reports, a pat on the head from Edward Blackwood and Lord Ashworth. So, you decided to steal what you felt you deserved. I decided to take what was rightfully mine. The artifacts I sold were my compensation for years of unrecognized labor. The deaths were unfortunate, but necessary. Each one was a threat to my freedom, my reputation, my future. And now you have none of those things. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, remembered not as a brilliant archaeologist, but as a murderer. Perhaps. But I will also be remembered as the woman who discovered the secret chamber of Amenhotep the Magnificent, the greatest find in Egyptian archaeology since Tutankhamun. That cannot be taken from me, no matter what happens in any court of law. It was, Poirot reflected, a peculiar form of victory, to value academic recognition above human life, above freedom, above everything that most people considered important. But he had encountered such obsessions before, and they always ended the same way, with the obsessed in prison or dead, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. "Take her away," he said to Inspector Morrison. "Let the courts determine her fate." Chapter 11. Justice and Closure. The trial of Dr. Helena Crane dominated the newspapers for weeks, combining, as it did, the glamour of ancient Egypt with the horror of modern murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Stone's testimony, the journal entries, the physical evidence from the museum, and her own detailed confession. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to death, though the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, following an appeal that cited her gender and her contributions to archaeological science. Opinion was divided on whether this clemency was deserved, but Poirot expressed no view on the matter. His work was to solve crimes, not to determine punishments. Victor Stone received a lesser sentence of 20 years, having cooperated fully with the prosecution and provided crucial testimony against his former partner. His role in the murders was undeniable, but the court accepted that he had been manipulated and threatened by a woman far more intelligent and ruthless than himself. The stolen artifacts were eventually recovered, most of them, at least, through an international investigation that traced Dr. Crane's network of buyers across Europe and the Middle East. Many had been purchased in good faith by collectors who had no idea of their criminal provenance. These were returned to the Egyptian government with diplomatic apologies and substantial compensation. The secret chamber itself became the subject of intense academic interest once its existence was officially acknowledged. A new expedition was mounted to properly excavate and document its contents, and the artifacts recovered proved to be as spectacular as Dr. Crane had claimed. Perhaps the most significant Egyptian find of the century. William Blackwood attended the opening of the expanded Golden Pharaoh Exhibition, which now included artifacts from the secret chamber as well as the original discovery. He stood for a long time before the golden mask, studying the serene face of a king dead for 3,000 years. "Do you believe in curses now, Mr. Blackwood?" Poirot asked, joining him before the case. "I believe in human evil," William replied, "which is curse enough, I think. The mask didn't kill my father or my brother. A woman did. A woman who valued gold and recognition more than human life." "A common tragedy, unfortunately. The desire for wealth and power has driven men and women to murder since the beginning of time." "And the pharaoh himself? Amenhotep the Magnificent? What do you suppose he would think of all this?" Poirot considered the question.
I suspect he would find it familiar. The courts of ancient Egypt were filled with intrigue and murder, poisonings, conspiracies, struggles for power.
Human nature does not change, Mr. Blackwood. Only the methods evolve. Then the curse is real, in a sense. Not supernatural, but human. The curse of greed, of ambition, of willingness to destroy others for personal gain. If you wish to see it that way, yes. But I prefer to see it as a puzzle that can be solved through reason and evidence, bringing the guilty to justice and the innocent to peace. You've certainly brought justice. Whether any of us will find peace, William shook his head. That remains to be seen. He walked away, leaving Poirot alone with the golden mask. The detective studied it one last time. The serene face, the unseeing eyes, the inscription that had caused so much fear and superstition. He who disturbs the rest of Amenhotep shall know the wrath of the gods, the curse proclaimed. But the wrath that had claimed 4 lives was entirely human. The wrath of a woman who believed she deserved more than fate had given her, and who was willing to kill to get it. The curse of the Golden Pharaoh was not real, but the evil it had concealed was very real indeed. Chapter 12. Epilogue. Months later, Poirot received a letter from Egypt, from the director of the Cairo Museum, expressing gratitude for his role in recovering the stolen artifacts and bringing the criminals to justice. Enclosed with the letter was a small object wrapped in silk, a scarab beetle carved from lapis lazuli, one of the few artifacts from the secret chamber that had not been catalogued or claimed. A gift, the letter explained, from a grateful nation. May it bring you the protection of the ancient gods and remind you that truth, like the pharaohs themselves, is eternal. Poirot placed the scarab on his mantelpiece, where it caught the afternoon light and glowed with an inner fire that seemed almost alive. He did not believe in magic or curses, but he could appreciate beauty, and the scarab was undeniably beautiful. A gift from a dead king, he murmured to himself. Most appropriate, considering the circumstances. He settled into his chair with a cup of tisane, reflecting on the case and its resolution. 4 deaths, all made to look like the work of an ancient curse, or the result of human greed and ambition. Dr. Helena Crane had been brilliant, perhaps the most intelligent criminal he had ever encountered. But her brilliance had been corrupted by resentment and entitlement, leading her to believe that she was above the moral laws that governed ordinary people. It was a familiar pattern. Intelligence without conscience produced monsters, and monsters eventually destroyed themselves. Dr. Crane had built an elaborate scheme of theft and murder, only to see it collapse when a dead man's journal revealed the truth she had tried so hard to conceal. The Golden Pharaoh had claimed his revenge after all. Not through supernatural means, but through the simple fact that truth could not be buried forever. Dr. Edward Blackwood's careful documentation had survived, reaching across the grave to expose his killer and vindicate his memory. Justice, Poirot said to the empty room. Delayed, but not denied. He raised his cup in a silent toast to the dead. To Edward Blackwood and Thomas Hartwell, to Lord Ashworth and Robert Blackwood, all victims of a woman who had valued gold above life. Their deaths had been avenged, their names cleared, their memories honoured, and the golden mask of Amenhotep the Magnificent continued to stare serenely from its case in the British Museum, beautiful and deadly, a reminder that the treasures of the past could bring both wonder and destruction to those who sought them. Such was the nature of human desire. Such was the curse that never died. Thank you for joining us on the Little Grey Cells for the Golden Pharaoh mystery. If this tale of ancient treasures, elaborate deceptions, and murder concealed behind supernatural legends captured your imagination tonight, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you suspect Dr. Helena Crane before the evidence accumulated against her, or were you cleverly distracted by the curse's seemingly supernatural pattern of death? What did you think of her justification for the murders? Her bitter sense of being cheated of the recognition she had rightfully earned through years of brilliant scholarly work. And what about the nature of curses themselves? Are they merely superstition, invented by those who fear the unknown? Or do they reflect something real about human nature, about our eternal tendency toward greed and violence that persists across all the millennia of recorded history? These are questions worth contemplating as you reflect on tonight's dark tale of ambition and revenge. We love hearing from fellow mystery enthusiasts, and your engagement helps us bring more tales of the little Belgian detective to life. The world of Hercule Poirot is vast and endlessly fascinating, filled with puzzles that challenge even the keenest minds and moral dilemmas that trouble even the most confident consciences. Until next time, keep those grey cells active and thoroughly well exercised. Remember that the most elaborate deceptions often conceal the simplest and most human of motives. And trust that truth, like the treasures of ancient Egypt, will eventually emerge from even the deepest darkness, where criminals have sought to bury it. The pharaohs may have believed in curses and the supernatural powers of their gods, but Hercule Poirot believes in evidence and the power of human reason. And evidence, unlike curses, never lies and never fails those who seek it diligently. Farewell, dear listeners and fellow seekers of truth, and may your own investigations always lead you to justice, wisdom, and understanding.